What's up, guys? Today we are going over Gen 3 Moltres and how it went from languishing in BL to becoming recognized as a legitimate OU Pokemon. So, a couple months ago, the Advanced Council moved to recognize the consensus within the Advanced community, which was, look, Moltres is no longer even a semi-gimmicky Pokemon. It has no surprise factor whatsoever anymore, but it's being used regardless, and that's because it's genuinely good. Compared to another BL Pokemon such as, let's say, Jinx, which has a lot of potential upside, but it's also quite risky, and for that reason, it's hard to fit it on teams, and it doesn't get used all that much. As opposed to Moltres, which for several years now has seen its well-defined niche reflected in the amount of widespread teams you can build with it, widespread legitimate teams you would bring to a high-level tournament setting consistently. Whereas Jinx, sure, you might bring it in the semifinals of a tournament because it might catch your opponent off guard, but it would have to be very, very calculated. Whereas Moltres is game-to-game consistent to where, sure, you might be looking to exploit your opponent's reliance or over-reliance on Metagross, Celebi, and Magneton, but at the same time, it's still going to be a good Pokemon in just about any matchup. It's going to have some use, whereas Jinx, kind of, if it doesn't get what it's looking for, then it falls flat on its face. So, today we'll explore why Moltres is so good that we gave it the honor of being real OU. But in addition to exploring that well-defined niche in the metagame, we first have to go back in time and see Moltres wasn't always all that. So first, look, this is the ADV OU threat list from about 7.5 years ago, and there's Breloom, there's Dusclops, there's Houndoom, Medicham, not exactly high OU Pokemon. So we're in the M's, and look at that. No Moltres whatsoever. It was not on people's radar. It was gimmicky. If you look at the old Moltres analysis, it kind of suggests the same idea, that it doesn't really have that much merit. Now, this is not me shitting on the players of the past. Metagame knowledge evolves over time using the knowledge that came before it. So, but yeah, this is to illustrate the point that Moltres was not always considered to be, even that good. I mean, sure, yeah, it's strong and it can make for some fun stuff, but you wouldn't see it in many tournaments. So, this analysis is very outdated considering the rest and sleep talk stuff. I mean, there were a couple people using Will-O-Wisp sets and Sunny Day and Sub and weird stuff like back in 2013, but for the most part, it was still a gimmick. And you could kind of dismiss being Moltres weak as, oh, it's Moltres. Kind of like how you can dismiss being weak to a lot of BLs like Jinx or, let's say, Breloom, because that's been seeing a lot of usage lately. You can say, look, I know I'm weak to it, but first of all, it's a BL Pokemon, it's a Jinx, it's a Breloom. It's not going to be seen. And even if I do face it, I can play around it. And Moltres, in the current day, if you're weak to it, you don't really have that many options to play around it. As for the analysis, I just want to mention that we are currently working on this replacement that you see here, and it will be more updated for the current metagame. Anyway, so as you see with Moltres, then it used to languish with some Pokemon that anyone with even a passing interest knows is not really part of OU. I mean, Zam has a niche, Arcanine it doesn't, outside of stupid gimmicks, and I'm not going to go through every BL, but basically you see that it was in company it really did not deserve, considering how often it was used and how good it was considered in OU. So, what exactly makes it so good? Well, the first thing I want to mention is that a lot of Pokemon in Advance, or a lot of cores, popular cores that make up significant portions of lots of great teams, are weak to the Fire and Grass combination. So, for example, stuff like mixed Tyranitar and mixed Salamence or even Mixed Wheezing. If you go into the Ruins of Outforum and look for the threads made by UD, then the Team Dump thread, he specifically mentions how good that attacking combination is, and how it threatens so much of the metagame, because effortlessly you are blowing through Skarmory and Swampert, and you are basically hitting a lot of Pokemon super effective. It's kind of like the new Bolt Beam, I think he said, and I agree with it. So the basic idea with Moltres is it's got the same special attack stat as Zapdos, and it has Fire Grass coverage, which is, we already know, to be good. So Flamethrower, and another advantage it has over Zapdos is that against targets like Snorlax, then it can actually hit harder because it has Fire Blast, and since its move pool isn't too good, then it can kind of run whatever it wants. Another thing that Moltres is excellent at using is Will-O-Wisp. So the first thing to mention is that old Sunny Day stuff, not really the case. And the reason that's not really the case is because, as you might know from seeing or reading stuff about special attackers overwhelming things like Zapdos, Zapdos too, but also Snorlax, thanks to sand, Moltres does not want to be removing that sand. And even if you... I mean, there is a niche for Sunny Day Moltres for sure, but that is not the niche that vaulted Molt into OU. Moltres is more one of those Pokemon that abuses the sand. It likes having those lefties canceled out, so even if it Fire Blasts a Salamence, it's hitting that Mence really, really hard. It's not going to be recovered off in a couple turns. So that means that in a scenario such as, for example, if it's facing down a Magneton and the guy's like, oh, well, I don't want to, just switch something into Will-O-Wisp, so I'm just going to sacrifice my less useful Magneton. Similar idea against Heracross. With Moltres, you can just let loose the Fire Blast, and even if you hit that Mence, or that Suicune, or that Gyarados, then you're going to be leaving a mark. So, therefore, you're not going to be using a lot of Sun with Moltres, generally. You're going to be abusing Sandstorm like other Pokemon like Zapdos. So, yeah, Fire Grass coverage is big because... And you never want to go HP Ice. I mean, I know it's tempting. Let me smack Salamence and Flygon around, but Moltres utterly destroying Swampert, one of the few Pokemon that resists fire, is just too good. Do not leave home without HP Grass on your Moltres. I also want to mention again that special attack stat. So even if you Fire Blast into a T-Tar, you're still probably leaving a pretty big mark on it if it's offensive. And yeah, so that means its HP Grass is really going to sting too. Alright, so now we know. Moltres is running Fire Grass coverage and Will-O-Wisp. It's got some other options we'll get to later. So what exactly is it doing with this Fire Grass Will-O-Wisp coverage? What kind of things is it preying on? Well, let me show you some big advanced Pokemon that just happen to get utterly crushed by fire, especially Stab Fire, because, Metagross can live a Mixed Mence Fire Blast and explode on it, but it's never, ever, ever taking Moltres's. So, Celebi, that's a big one. Fortress, obviously, I mean, that's not special, but Fortress, Heracross, Jirachi, Magneton, Metagross, Skarmory, of course. And you might look at all these Pokemon that don't exactly hate fire, but trust me, look. Celebi, Magneton, and Metagross, these are big Pokemon. Matter of fact, they make up a lot of great teams together. Same with Skarmory. So let me show you. So Celebi, Magneton, Metagross. This could be an SD pass physical offense team. So you throw in your Gyarados, you throw in your Heracross, you throw in your Salamence, your T-Tar, whatever. Now, look at how Moltres just utterly, first of all, just spams fire and nothing really likes it. But, Will-O-Wisp, well, Gyarados, oh, I can take fire moves. No, you can't, Make this a Snorlax. Oh, I can't switch into Will-O-Wisp. Well, not at all. In your dreams, forget about it. So, you can already see, and this is a common style team. I mean, you remove the Celebi and you throw in a Suicune. Big deal. And, you make this Salamence or whatever. But look, this is still destroyed by Moltres. Look at all the opportunity it gets, because it comes in on big Pokemon, not just Celebi, but Magneton and Metagross. Oh my god, these are big Pokemon. You can't switch into this Fire Blast HP Grass Will-O-Wisp combo in Sand. I mean, so, like, Suicune, Rest Suicune, you might think, oh, well, Rest Suicune. First of all, if you're being forced to rest with Suicune against anything defensively, you're just on the back foot, and it gets pressured really, really hard, so... It's not about beating Moltres in a vacuum, it's that the few Pokemon that can really handle Moltres safely are big, fat, and defensive, and give you leeway for your other guys to come in safely. So, for example, if my Moltres is switching into Metagross, which keeps it away from Zapdos, which keeps Zapdos away from Metagross, rather, then I'm forcing in Suicune, then my Zapdos comes in for free and rains Thunderbolts on this team too, so that's just an example. Yeah, another thing I want to mention before we move on to other kinds of teams Moltres destroys, then I want to mention Moltres' defensive use, because, look, a lot of Pokemon hit really, really hard, okay? But a question with a lot of them is, how do they get onto the field? That's one reason why Tyranitar and Metagross and Salamence are so good, and Heracross, or rather, they're so good at getting in and doing so much damage because they switch into a lot of stuff. They have great resistances, and it's one reason why Heracross is not as easy to get so much damage out of consistently, because it doesn't have that well-defined defensive usage. Now, Moltres doesn't exactly wall half of OU, but it's ground immune. That's already a great pivot. That's how Mence makes half its entries. You know, fighting resistant, Brick Break, same deal. Of course, it's got to watch out for Rock Slide coverage, but the point is that it's got the resistances to pivot in, which can be useful if it's faster, or just if you need to draw another attack, or if the attack, of course, is Choice Banded. Yeah, you can also obviously come in on something like an HP Grass. So, Earthquake, that means not just Metagross, but also Swampert, Salamence if it's banded, T-Tar if it's banded, or, you know, the latter two also spamming Brick Break. And Brick Break and also goes for Heracross, also obviously Megahorn. Risky business, but on the first turn you're generally okay. And against Metagross, I mean, Meteor Mash, you resist that. I mean, I wouldn't recommend 5 Pokemon weak to Meteor Mash and Moltres, but you get the idea that it can do stuff. So, Celebi is obviously a great target, doesn't really hurt it much at all. Jirachi, you can't go gung-ho, guns blazing into Jirachi every single time. That won't be successful, but the idea is the same. I have this on loop, okay. So that Moltres will be able to get in consistently and deal damage. So now we're wondering, well, you know, how does it make the damage stick? If it's not facing that miracle matchup. And you look at OU and you're like, huh, not a lot of Pokemon that can handle Wisp here, that can also handle HP Grass. In that, you know, Celebi is decent at soaking up Will-O-Wisp from Gengar if it's Spadef, and it can threaten it back with Psychic. But, you know, if Celebi is your Will-O-Wisp absorber and you gotta handle it with, you gotta handle Moltres with it, then, you know, good luck. And look at the physical Pokemon. You know, that Rock Slide weakness, if you're relying on Rock Slide to beat Moltres, that means you can't actually switch into Moltres without a great deal of risk, because let me get my Aerodactyl. Oh, look, burned. Now it's shit useless versus everything. A lot of teams, as you'll see in a second, rely on Pursuit Tyranitar, and they're like, you know what, first of all, I'm already using it to pursue Gengar, so I don't mind being burned, and it's all special, so I'm not really losing out on much. And the idea is, look, I gotta get it in on Fire Blast and Will-O-Wisp and chip Moltres that way. And Moltres has even caught on to the point where, alright, well, it's obviously Special Tar, I can just stay in HP Grass and he's dead. And yeah, so obviously you can pivot around Moltres too. I mean, if you bring Zapdos in on HP Grass, then you're gravy. And there are obviously other counters, like Refresh Milotic is a huge pain for Moltres, but you get the idea. Will-O-Wisp and Fire Blast and HP Grass, it's, as you can see here, it's devastating to the OU metagame. I mean, even Starmie, you might think, oh, Natural Cure, faster, recover? Yeah, try switching into HP Grass. It's not fun, especially since bulky Starmie doesn't really threaten Moltres with an Oko, so not really a great switch in at all. And offensive Starmie doesn't really want to switch in more than ideally once. So anyway, back to the common teams Moltres mangles. So spike stuff. Moltres' ground immunity is also great because it is immune to spikes, so you can't just wear it down that way and put it into range for your Gengar Thunderbolt, let's say. No, you're going to have to hit it twice very often if that's your way of killing it, so you got to be careful. We'll get to everything regarding Moltres, like specifics of EV spreads and timid versus modest and whatnot later. Don't worry. For now, we just want to go over what exactly Moltres does that makes it so fearsome. So here we've got some generic spike stuff, minus Blissey. So we've got, let's say, the Magneton, because one of the reasons Moltres rose to prominence was because Skarmory Magneton teams were quite popular. This team of mine being a prototypical example. And as you can see here, the options are pretty much, don't let it come in for free too badly, pivot around it, pursue it with Tyranitar. It's not something you want to face at all. I have my methods, but that's specific. I swear I make my teams foolproof, guys. Anyway, so stuff like this, and it doesn't have to be this exact Scar Magneton lineup. The style had a lot of fluctuation. Like, for example, this is another thing I made, although Megan used to run the same 6. And I know that sounds suspicious, but I swear it was a different thing. But that's not really the point here. So the point is, this team has 3 electric types, and Moltres is still a pain, all because it comes in on Metagross. I can't emphasize this enough. Metagross is a pillar of advance, and being able to come in on it so relentlessly, and not just come in on it, but immediately threaten death, or if not death, a significant nasty chunk of some sort of damage in Will-O-Wisp that's not really getting healed off. And I mean, sure, it's not a foolproof Metagross counter, obviously. Metagross, I mean, it doesn't run Toxic anymore because it's useless against the Refresh, Swampert, and Milotic infestation. But it started running Rock Slide recently. That's just because of Moltres. It's just because some teams are so shit out of luck against Moltres that they have to hit it when it can come in. Because while Moltres does have its defined defensive niche that lets it wreak havoc consistently, it doesn't really go much outside of that. It's not like it's suddenly going to start switching into things like Tyranitar. I mean, it actually kind of does sometimes, but that's not the point. The point is that if you take away Moltres' switch-ins, it can't hurt you as much, and it still has its weaknesses you can prey on. So the game in a case like this, when you're weak against Moltres, is don't let it come in for free, and be prepared to cut your losses, and then be able to respond in turn. So you can then prey on those weaknesses and throw back an assault at the opposing team. So like with physical offense, then it would be, all right, I'm going to let this shitty Magneton go, and then I'm going to come in with Salamence, and I'm going to threaten Rock Slide, and I'm going to do some damage. I can double switch to Metagross and explode on the water or whatever, and then I'm fine. But in this case, it'd be similar. So some players have started saying, you know what, that last move on Metagross, it's not usually that useful, and Rock Slide also hits Zapdos, which is nice. It's actually very significant, but the main use is I can't be double switching my Metagross out or not using it at all whenever I face something that I need to rely on it for, like Snorlax, or that number 1 Pokemon, Tyranitar. So it's you still want to use Metagross because it's an amazing Pokemon. This is just a way of punishing or really defending yourself against Moltres wreaking havoc on you, and that speaks to how good Moltres is. So yeah, stuff like this really hates it. Or even a more defensive team that doesn't have as many traditional victims, like let's say this one, which is quite popular. So you've got these guys, you've got your defensive Jirachi, and then you've got your Flygon was the standard for a while. Some people use Swampert, whatever. You think, oh, well, this is pretty defensive, and oh, look, Moltres just dumps on it. even if it's Flygon, even if it's Swampert. And you've got your Calm Zapdos and your defensive Jirachi, so it's not coming in a lot, but it can still come in and make your life miserable, because it comes in on Swampert, it can still come in on a double switch against Jirachi. Like, let's say you bait in the Jirachi with something like Zapdos, and when they go to it, then, and yes, Zapdos Moltres is legitimate, although not as easy to fit. It's just an example of, look, and not to mention they can't even do the T-Tar thing, the T-Tar Pursuit thing, because if you've got a Spikes team with Gengar, like most Moltres teams are, then you're already baiting T-Tar in and burning it, and it's already in a shitty position when it tries to check Moltres. So you're left with a bunch of awkward pivoting around it, trying to get Zapdos in and try to revenge it with Gengar and try to make sure it doesn't switch in, and which can be preyed upon. So Moltres, basically, even in a matchup like this where Moltres isn't ideally, primed to kill everything in sight, it's still a significant threat, and that's what I mean. So now, what you might be wondering, all right, well, what happens when Moltres faces a Blissey? Well, I'll tell you. The reason why Jirachi started becoming popular on teams like this is because it's not weak to sand, which means that even if it's dealing with 3 layers of spikes, it's not the easiest cookie to wear down. Now let's just take this standard team, and this Zapdos can be anything. I mean, look, get spikes up, which is not going to be hard, and Blissey is your switch-in, alright, that's still being put on the back foot, you're being forced to soft-boiled. Oh look, my Choice Band Tyranitar is now in, and it's going to destroy you. And not to mention, I want to mention that one of the Sand Spikes teams that Moltres fits on best is this team. Look at that. It's great. It's great for a number of reasons. But before I go into why it's good, other than this 5 is good, use anything you want here, I want to mention this other move that Moltres has sometimes taken to using in Roar. And this means if you got 3 layers of spikes, and your Blissey comes in and gets roared, you are in a world of trouble, because now you can no longer KO it. And let's say, you roar in the Swampert, spikes damage, oh no, looks like something's going down. So it's a very nasty tool to have, and Moltres has the moveset flexibility to afford it. Because, I mean, fire move, grass move, and some people don't even use Will-O-Wisp just because it's so threatening already. But we'll get into that later. Anyway, so why is Moltres so popular on this team? Other than, it's the big 5, so let me just slap on whatever I want. Well, first of all, now here we're seeing its defensive utility used for a specific purpose, other than, lol, it switches into Metagross. So the switching into Metagross thing is big, because obviously when you use Metagross offensively, you're gunning for that Scarm or that Pert. You want to remove it from the equation so that you can abuse it with something else. And when, instead of being met with a defensive Scarm Swampert that even if you don't break through, you can ideally take advantage of, instead you're being met with a Moltres, and you're saying, oh my god, not only did I not get the wall I was gunning for, now I'm being threatened with a KO, and anything that switches in is going to get, slammed as well. So it's taking back that momentum that Moltres allows. Also, the lack of spikes weakness is very nice, considering the amount of spikes wars this team tends to get into. And Roar is also nice for Fortress matchups, because if you get Moltres in on Fortress and then you Roar and you keep dragging it in, it obviously can never stay in unless it just die for nothing, and it's pretty nasty. But yeah, there's that as well. And the being able to turn an offensive threat into offensive momentum for yourself is a key for not being on the back foot, and it also extends to Heracross. Like, let's say you don't want Metagross drawing in your Skarmory and going to Magneton, and if it's HP Grass Magneton, you can't get around that by going to Swampert, especially since if you get your Swampert blown up, then DD Tar is scary, and so is whatever else. And Moltres does similar things against it turns that Magneton double switch into offensive momentum for you, which this team, and it's a lot less risky than going to Dugtrio on your opponent's Metagross. That's what's really nice about it, and it turns that Magneton into a major threat for your opponent's team. And another giant threat it does really well against is a Heracross. Obviously, it just revenges the hell out of it. And it can also provide some needed muscle against obnoxious Calm Minders like Jirachi and Celebi that can be annoying. And even like SD Pass Celebi that, tends to bait in Skarmory and then it passes all over you and is obnoxious. Moltres thwarts that. So it's just a great tool to have because it's offensive and it puts offensive pressure on those Pokemon that usually rely on this team not dishing out too much immediate damage. And it can keep those threats away from your walls that you need to conserve. So, we're actually going to be examining a team very much like this that was given to me for the purpose of example by my good buddy Sunny, or Eden's Embrace, if you guys know him. But before we go on to more stuff, I want to mention other moves Moltres can run. And the big one being Overheat, and I take full credit for this one. And at first it seems kind of gimmicky, but it's really good. And it gives you that giant extra burst of damage that can be key in something like even Blissey. Like if you're roaring the Blissey around and it comes in on you at 30%, boom, it's dead. And Roar is also nice alongside it because it means Pokemon can't take advantage of your -2 special attack. Like, oh, look, he overheated my Blissey. Let me just Calm Mind on him with Celebi. Nope. So, Overheat is the other big one people use. And then, Flamethrower, Fire Blast is really, that's a debate for other people. Flamethrower is generally good because it kills Metagross. It's going to kill everything else mostly. Fire Blast is a little gratuitous. You're going to be hitting Ments for a lot of chip anyway. So, generally, it's some combination of the moves I've mentioned. Agility is nice late game, especially if something gets revenge killed by a Dugtrio. Also worth mentioning that Moltres is... what's the word I'm looking for? Imperviousness? That's not the ideal one, but it'll do. Basically, its imperviousness to the Dugtrio is also really valuable, and it abuses Dugtrio locked into Earthquake KOing something because it's like, alright, well, now I'm going to KO something of yours. So, and Agility can really put that through. The problem is, while Fire Grass is great sweeping coverage, Moltres is great because it 2-hit KOs just about everything. But it's not as much of an OHKO machine. And Will-O-Wisp is nasty on the switch, but in that one-on-one situation against Salamence, it's not so good. And Fire Blast is not really OHKOing Zapdos, so it's not going to be pulling off too many sweeps. I generally prefer getting those 2 hits off, and I think most people agree with me. That said, Agility can be used, but generally when you're using Moltres for some sort of defensive utility as well, Agility doesn't do much for you, so you don't really use it. Another use for Roar I want to mention that's really key is some people even use it as a kind of ersatz Suicune check because non-sleep talk Suicune, it rests and he's like, all right, well, let me roar this motherfucker. And then it comes in and it's, spikes and all that. And suddenly it's a threat. So yeah, Roar is really nice for that. And Snorlax as well. Snorlax is a big one. So yeah, those are the main uses of Roar. And as for Overheat, then I mentioned them in this handy-dandy thread. These are my big ones. I will leave the link in the description for anyone who wants to check it out. Alright, so, anything else? I don't think that's anything else. I mean, the sunny day morning stuff we can leave for later. Some people have messed around with Toxic, but generally we have gone over what you are going to be seeing. I tried Heat Wave once because I wanted more than Flamethrower and less than Fire Blast. It was dumb. Anyway, don't use Extra Sensory either. So yeah, what we've gone over is what you will be seeing. Flamethrower, Hidden Power Grass. I think this is generally what you see on Roar. You'll never see Mono Overheat. You'll either see Overheat and another Fire move, or just another Fire move in Will-O-Wisp, something like this. And Flamethrower can be Fire Blast, but those are the two. So, yeah, I used to not be a huge fan of Moltres because of that whole, I think it works better when it's hitting things on the switch idea. But then I realized it OHKOs so many things that, and by forcing that spikes damage on those things, that it can it can help itself more easily. So I like that a lot. Alright, so now we are going to go over some examples of how Moltres functions. So this is a World Cup game from a long time ago. Let me just zoom in. And yeah, this is as you can see, oh, you can't see. This game is from World Cup 2015, a while ago. Anyway, so as you can see here, Ray has a physical offense team, and I'm just going to go back real quick. And Moltres comes in on the Metagross, even aiming for Swampert with HP Grass, and suddenly, free Will-O-Wisp, bang, there goes Snorlax. And this was specific because Ray wanted to cover the Spiker switch in this case being Cloyster, but it could have easily been a Skarmory, and the same idea would have counted. And he just gets a free Fire Blast because because for Ray, if he goes for, this is game specific, but if Ray just body slams into Skarm or Gengar, then it's not so good, or T-Tar. Generally, he was aiming for the Spiker. Anyway, that's not really important. The whole point is that now that I've adjusted my my screen, Moltres just rips him up, and this is a perfectly fine physical offense team. Nothing you can really shit on too hard. And Moltres, just look at how vicious it is here. So, see, look at that. Just helpless. And Ray's got to do ridiculous stuff just to... even if he wasn't dealing with the spikes, he would have been on the back foot significantly. Moltres just continues to kill shit. So, this is a great example, and this was from years ago. This was before Moltres started picking up traction. So, here's one from 2016. Oh, you can't see that. This is coming up on 4 years ago. Anyway, so same deal. Look, physical offense team, Moltres, Burn, everything is disgusting. Dex's team is unconventional, whereas Cyberodon's was a sign of things to come. Really just abusing those spikes in conjunction with sand and making it disgusting all around. So... see, look, Heracross gets a kill because you don't want to switch Moltres into Rock Slide, and Moltres immediately responds with this. So, yeah. And this is more of the same. And this game is actually notable because he wanted to get Heracross. He wanted to switch Heracross. Let me stop forwarding out. So he's at 26 here, and he's a Salic Heracross. So he wants to switch out, let whatever else die, come back in, get Salic, and clean up. And Dexa had Agility, which would have won in the game, but, this happened. So, but yeah, that's an example of how Agility can be good, but this is against a very weakened team. And like I said earlier, your Moltres is going to be doing fine regardless of whether you have... agility or not, and you usually want other moves, so hasn't been seen that much. Alright, moving on. So this was a World Cup 2017 finals, and this was the team I was mentioning earlier, although it has Snorlax over Tyranitar, which is not a change I supported. Anyway, if Pursuit Tyranitar is here, then it's a lot better than this complete helplessness. But even if Pursuit Tyranitar is here, there's Gengar and Dugtrio alongside the Will-O-Wisp Moltres, so Tyranitar is going to get removed, and then Moltres is just going to be a massive pain. So, yeah, since Blissey's also in the picture and Sand is better there, but you get the idea. Moltres, death. Even with all these guys that threaten it, it just takes one switch in, and it's going to leave a massive, massive mark. So... yes, that is another example. Alright, moving on. Here, I want to mention that Moltres teams do not have a great matchup against teams that are already dedicated to messing up Spike's teams. Spikes go a long way in helping Moltres break more defensive stuff. The offensive stuff, lose your Skarmory on turn 1 for all the Moltres user cares, because it just means, it's going to be messing stuff up irregardless of spikes. Sure, it might make a Snorlax or Suicune able to pivot in, 1 or 2 more times, but for all intents and purposes, it's going to be suffocating regardless. So the proliferation of teams like you see on Void's End here, the Milotic, Magneton, Claydol stuff that's just dedicated to shitting on spikes every which way, then Moltres does not do so well, especially because now with spikes up, as you will see in a second, then Moltres, Golden Sun is using one of his trademark teams. He's using, okay, so Moltres is in, and now look, with spikes up, like, you really got to get Moltres in before those spikes go down, because that's when Milotic can't actually switch in. So he's forced to let his Magneton go, which, not ideal. But yeah, Refresh Milotic is just dumping on it. So the way you should handle Milotic when you've got a Moltres to actually get some use out of it is you spam Will-O-Wisp and hit it on the switch, because it has to refresh that off as opposed to recovering off HP Grass. Because if you just HP Grass, it's going to recover back to full. But if you make it refresh, then it's lost 12% from the initial burn. So that's the way to do it. Anyway, so as you can see, Moltres is struggling a little more here because his team is so anti-spikes, but would have been the same if that was a Zapdos, for example. So, Golden Sun played a terrific game here. But yeah, I wanted to highlight that specific thing. And Protect on Moltres is something that is also a good move, but it's kind of like Agility in that while it can be nice, it definitely can lock down some stuff for you, the other moves are generally more useful. Now, it's always nice to, burn and, protect, especially if the switch is like Snorlax. It's nice because it means they can't double switch on you as easily. They have to respect your protect and then switch out, and you can potentially play around that by just immediately switching out as they try to hit you on the obligatory protect. But it means no double switching back to, let's say, Metagross or Magneton or something. And it's also great for scouting Aerodactyl that might have pivoted in on you. Same with something like a Choice Band Mence. So I think, that was great. That was a great example. So a couple more things. So we're not just gonna sit through this. That was a terrific game from Golden Sun, even though Moltres didn't do much. So before we move on to other examples, which were that's not a Moltres game. Sorry, that was something else I wanted to watch. So this last game is just another Moltres example. I wanted to mention EV spreads. So the standard Moltres, today it's considered to be timid. I am more of a modest guy myself, but timid has some undeniable perks. With 300 speed, you are outspeeding all of the following things. Mixed Salamence with a neutral nature, and you can tell with Sand. And that can be huge because sometimes, they're weakened or you're weakened, and, it's just nice. The bigger one, of course, is Jolly Heracross, because Moltres checks Heracross, and some people run Jolly Heracross since it outruns a lot of Zapdoses and a lot of Menses. So, if you're really dead set on using Moltres to check Heracross, Timid might be nicer. And those are the big ones. You'll also outrun Mata Zapdos, which can be key. Matter of fact, a lot of offense teams, like the mixed offense stuff, they got to go Timid Zapdos, not just because it's good against the plethora of base 100s, but because when they switch into Moltres, they want to be able to actually threaten it out the next turn. Because as soon as your Moltres, if you're slower, then as soon as your Moltres check is in Fire Blast range, then obviously it's no longer the check. So you get what I'm getting at. So yeah, Timid is generally the thing, and then you can put these last EVs anywhere, or you can just go max speed Moltres like a lot of people do. Bulky Gengar used to go down to 300 for similar reasons, and now it has to go up to 308 because being slower than Moltres is awful. However, if you do go modest, it's also perfectly fine. Moltres is a great speed tier for advanced, so you can go down to here, get some bulk. This 269 is Adamant Heracross, so you can get some nice bulk. You still outrun offensive Suicunes, because Timid Suicune is very rare. And you'll outrun bulky stuff like Celebes and Jirachis and Zapdoses, and you'll still outrun mid-range offensive stuff like faster versions of Metagross, T-Tar, and Swampert. So, and Cloyster as well. So, yeah, those are generally the EVs used on Moltres. Now we're going to go to this last game, and then we're going to use Sunny's team as an example of these concepts we've been discussing. So, this was another Kalos Invitational game. This game was for World Cup. Yeah, this was just Golden Sun using his usual. So here we see the Spike Sword, we see the Will-O-Wisp Gengar. He's got the Refresh Claydol, but you know, Golden Sun has a method of dealing with it. So he's gonna. It's not the Magneton Claydol stuff that's as tough, but this is a defensive team, and Golden Sun making good moves to get those rocks up. So you see, this team Zalmog is using is actually quite popular. I think it's an Osgood team, but yeah. So look, Moltres is in, and even against the Thunder Jirachi, even against the Blissey, look how much pressure he's under. He's got a soft boiled. I mean, even just the soft boiled giving the free switch is so good. Like, for example, if Zapdos or Moltres Thunderbolt the Blissey with spikes down, then without spikes down rather, then it can do annoying stuff like Thunder Wave or throw up a Wish or whatever. But you know, when you're soft boiling, you get that free switch, which is incredibly useful. So, and if you're wondering, well, in that scenario, if that's my purpose with Moltres, why aren't I just using Zapdos, which also checks Suicune? Then the answer is Will-O-Wisp, and you gotta have that kill on the Heracross and the Magneton and the Metagross. That OHKO is just so crucial. I mean, Zapdos has some similar defensive qualities for sure, insofar as handling Metagross and not being stopped by Swampert at all. But and you know, the extra coverage against Celebi and whatnot is just invaluable. So let me pull up that stuff from Sunny while this continues to go on. Yep, that's the team. So we'll come back to this once the game is over. And so yeah, as you see here, Taunt Gengar combines with Moltres just beautifully. And, you know, they beat down on the Pursuit Tars and the Blisseys together, and they have excellent offensive synergy. And this also applies to Zapdos, but the extra Will-O-Wisp from Moltres and the passive damage on things like Snorlax as well, you know, really invalidating it is just huge. It means T-Tar can't switch in either. So anyway, Moltres is going to finish this one off for good measure. So, yeah, now let's move on to Sunny's team. So, here we see, you know, the standard setup. So this is one of the more well-known Moltres teams because it's got 3 Taunters. It's got Taunt Skarm, Taunt T-Tar, and Taunt Gengar. And the idea is really just to mess with spikes as much as possible. And when you've got the 3 Taunters as well as Moltres, then it makes up for Pert and Blissey. Although if you run Fire Blast Blissey like Sunny does, then it's even more limited. Then you limit the ability for opposing spikes to get up, and that gives you a big advantage. Because a lot of these big 5+1 teams, then they can struggle in Spikes Wars when it's just kind of a semi-mirror match. But yeah. So the idea is that here you've got pressure from all ends, and Moltres is one of the best ways at pressuring them. I mean, punishes Magneton stuff really hard. So thanks to Sunny for the example. And now I asked him to say a few words because he has a lot of experience using this team. So the idea is, you know, you pressure Blissey, and you have the advantage in Spikes games, which is what I just said. So Taunt and Fire Blast Blissey and Moltres, of course. So really the only place that's safe setup is Swampert. So some more. So he's got Roar on Moltres for even more pressure on Blissey. So it's really not just getting it anywhere. I mean, Will-O-Wisping it or attacking it with spikes down is nice because it's doomed to repeat the cycle since it's forced to soft boil and do nothing as you force it out. But Roar just really, really brings the hammer down. So So he mentioned some issues with these kinds of teams, that being the Magneton Claydol stuff, because it makes Milotic and stuff more annoying. We saw that in the Golden Sun versus Void game, especially if they go with weather removal to really annoy with Dugtrio and then Rain Dance on something. That's really obnoxious. In those kinds of matchups, you've got to play with awareness to not lose your T-Tar and try to do as much damage as possible without letting them trap you. So put them on the back foot so you're not just constantly responding, because those teams feast on when you're just going, all right, now I spike, now I switch to my counter, and then they get picked apart quickly. So you really gotta. The good thing is that you can play on that assumption that they make quite easily, because they've got to go to Magneton as you go to Skarm. So there's your free entry and whatnot. And another thing is that Suicune can be really nasty, especially since Astamatito's recently started using Modest Sleep Talk Suicune, meaning it's hard to phase with Skarmory, and it's not going to work with Moltres at all. But so it's more a case with all the taunts and all the status, and you might need to get a little lucky, but you basically need to put it on the back foot. So that's the price you pay for using Moltres over Zapdos. But obviously the rewards are huge too. I mean, physical offense against this team is just a nightmarish matchup. So you've also got to check for HP Grass on a lot of stuff with mixed offenses, since you're just getting the spike if you pivot Skarm into them and get the spikes down. But with Moltres, then you have the option of pivoting into HP Grass safely and really threatening them. So something like the common mixed T-Tar that's running around these days, Ice Beam, Fire Blast, Brick Break, HP Grass, Moltres destroys that one-on-one. So, yeah, it's really nice. And yeah, so and the pros Sunny has here, mag offense, obviously mixed offense. It's not usually as dead to Moltres because they don't mind burn as much given the mixed stuff. Especially Ments, and they don't have as many slower Pokemon totally O-code by it, and in fact they have more Pokemon that are faster than it. But yeah, that's a good matchup, and obviously the Stall Ditto, it's a really good one. So thank you to Sunny for that. I'd also like to mention that Lum on T-Tar, on DD-Tar, DD and Pursuit alike, it's mostly for Gengar, but it's often used on those kinds of physical offenses or mixed offenses just to give you some sort of relief against Moltres spamming that WoW against Metagross. So yeah, that's it. And Moltres has been doing this for years. I mean, we saw replays from 2015 to 2019. I'd say it started taking off as used more and more and being recognized as a threat. As a threat you had to prepare for, I would say around 2-ish years ago. And you can sift through all the replays till the sun rises. But yeah, that was that. So that is why Moltres is now OU. It's the real deal. It is now sitting pretty between Milotic and Porygon 2. So before we wrap up, I said I would mention Sunny Day Moltres, and I would. So this is an example. It's when I mentioned weather change just now, then you might have said, "Hey, Moltres can do that," and Moltres can do that. And here's a team ZF has. I mean, some people go all the way with Claydol and whatnot, but here you see an example of what Moltres is good at with its defensive overlap, as you see him redundantly checking threats. That's what he's talking about. So see, Tress covering random breakers that attack these cores, keeping them away from the Pokemon you need. I mean, it's the same idea as on the Big 5 team. You go, hey, look, he's going to try and attack my wall with this, but look, I've got Moltres. I switch into it, and not only do I switch into it and cover it, I threaten him back with offense. How great is that? So this is a great team. This is a very, very intelligent team. Makes use of Sunny Days because he's got the longevity here with the Morning Sun, because he doesn't have Dugtrio to remove T-Tar. He's relying on wearing it down other ways. I think a more stereotypical version of this would be, dual trap and Claydol, and sometimes you just fit that weather change on the end. So like Moltres, Mag Trio, Claydol, and then Snorlax and Suicune. So yeah, that would be a stereotype. But yeah, so this is just an example. Now, I also want to mention before we go that there are other teams, like Moltres even gets used on some Magneton Spikes teams, like for example, this kind, and Magneton, and I mean, it seems weird, like, aren't I attacking the, what's it called? The Skarmories themselves, but Magneton does a lot of other different things. It can trap other Magneton for your own Skarm, and removing other Skarm means that they're already down a poke, so you know, less to switch in or less to sacrifice to Moltres. And what's nice about Moltres on Skarm Mag is that you can fill it in however you want. I mean, some people like do stuff like this. This would be a fine team. I mean, it's kind of bad against Suicune. You'd have to mess with it. I mean, but yeah, this is the basic idea. And there are more that I'm not thinking of right now. But yeah, Magneton or Moltres on Skarm Mag is nice because it kind of counters itself. I mean, it doesn't counter itself great, but it's immune to Will-O-Wisp, and it pressure stalls Fire Blasts really well. So if you want to give it some bulk, it can kind of it can take that roll up pretty nicely. I mean, it's not great, but it's something, you know? It stops immediate death from itself. So some people, Linear Curve used to use a lot of Fortress Moltres, and some people still like to use that, so they just use a standard Fortress team. It's pretty much, again, Big 5, but with why is that a Skarm? That should be a Blissey. Big 5, but with Fortress over Moltres, or with Fortress over Skarmory, sorry. And Fortress is nice at getting off spikes with Pursuit Tar, but sometimes you can't do it. And oh look, now you've got a spikes immune threat that, you know, gives you leeway, as well as performing the usual duties of, you know, overlapping defensive coverage and turning that overlapping defensive coverage into KOs against Pokemon that usually prey on the slow nature of these teams. And there was one more. Oh yeah, like even in recent times, we've seen some. First of all, I want to mention that Moltres alongside Skarm, it gives the whole Superman idea of, you know, floating above spikes and abusing them. But yeah, we've seen stuff like Ostamatitos was using, I think something like this. So, you know, if you pair Moltres with Dugtrio, I mean, sometimes it can be hard to fit because, I mean, you're giving up something like T-Tar, or you're giving up Blissey, or you're giving up Gengar or whatever. But Dugtrio makes it even nastier because, you know, bye-bye Blissey, bye-bye T-Tar. It's just overall nasty, so... I do want to mention, though, that Refresh Milotic is a huge enemy of these teams, so that's why I like to use stuff like Celebi on a team like this, actually, that I've been using a lot. So it gives more overlapping defensive coverage, does a little bit of everything, you know, Zapdos, Snorlax. It pivots into mixed stuff because I use a fast variant. So, yeah, you kind of... Milotic is a big one, so tweak your movesets. I mean, use your Taunt Tar. Taunt Tar is a great one for messing with Milotic and Claydol, the refresh stuff. And if you use Rock Slide Earthquake, you're not easily trapped by Dugtrio either. But yeah, so that's the idea. So I think that is where we're going to call it. So I hope you guys now see why Moltres is OU. It's a great Pokemon. It does so many things really nicely, and it's unique at what it does. I mean, there's a case to be made for Charizard, but Moltres versus Charizard is going to be its own video because that's more interesting. And this one is already long, and I've said I'm going to be trying to cut down on the long stuff. So I think this is going to be a good place to call it. So Moltres, from BL to OU forever. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I will catch you next time, and use Shiny Moltres.